views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
On this edition of Today's Verdict, President Trump is refusing to provide additional monetary aid to our city. Councilman Fernando Cabrera will be here to tell us what he is doing to force the federal government to step up and help our city. Next up, our subways are once again returning to normal usage. But with budget cuts directly affecting mass transit, what will happen to the subway system during the next 12 months? Our guest will tell us what her organization is doing to protect you while you commute underground. And finally, a well-known and respected employment attorney will be here to tell you all your protections your employer must give you once you return to the office. As you can see, we have much to get to, so stay tuned. Today's verdict's going to start right now. My favorite guest of the show, Council Member Fernando Cabrera. Councilman, how are you doing today?
I'm doing, been going through a lot. Through a lot. You know, had some family members. My mom was 82, had corona, and then my brother had it. Both two brothers, one of them had pneumonia. And my mother-in-law has stage 4 cancer. So I've been, it's been challenging.
Council member, you've been working hard. I see all the stuff you've been doing. You were invited to the George Floyd funeral. Tell us a little bit about what that was like and whether you think the movement is still gaining steam. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it was very moving to be there with the family, with friends. I was one of the only 2 New Yorkers there, and then of course Reverend Al Sharpton, and to hear the message and just to be at the moment. It was a historical moment. It felt surreal. I felt very humble to be there. The movement continues. There are changes that have been made right here in New York City, and more that needs to be made. I think in the area of economic development, economic justice needs to take place in a responsible manner, so we all could benefit from the promise of this land, and that we could have equity. So I believe there are some systemic changes taking place. We just want to make sure we do them right for the sake of our children and grandchildren.
Which leads us to really the budget and money, because a lot of times it comes down to proper funding. I know you're not particularly happy with the federal government and how they've been treating New York. Let's talk a little bit about that. Where do we stand with federal aid?
Well, the unfortunate thing is that the Trump administration has put a break, and we have received $0 to help our situation right here in New York City. And that's troubling. In New York State, we give, in the last 4 years, we give the federal government $116 billion more than we receive back. And yet, that ought not to be, especially in light of the fact of everything that we have gone through, and because we are one of the very few states that have gotten ahead of COVID-19, it makes even more sense, because we're opening things up, that those funding come to make sure that the economy thrives here in New York City. Let me tell you, if we don't get that funding at the end of this month, where I believe they're going to gather together again, Congress, that's the indication, we're going to lose 22,000 jobs in October. That is staggering for us to go through such a economic shock here in the city, it will be devastating. So we need that funding. We need it right now. It makes sense. And only the federal government at this point can step up because the state, they're shot too. They caught us. So we had to dip into our savings, all of it, the $4.5 billion that we have there. And yet it's not sufficient. And then this is going to spiral into next year if we don't get that help and we don't get it right now.
You know, I'm old enough to remember what happened in the 1970s, and the city was on a major decline. Unfortunately, the Bronx got hit the hardest, and we've come so far as a borough, certainly. I hear, you had mentioned that there's no leadership at the top of our government, neither fiscal or moral. Certainly, morally, many people are unhappy. But fiscally, is there a chance that the president and the government may change their mind and get us the money we need? Does it look like the pressure's there?
I think there's a chance. We have Pelosi and Schumer that are fighting for us. Honestly, I thought that at the 3.5 budget that help that came through the SBA, that was the moment they should have negotiated, not to have postponed. I think the negotiations could have went better our way. But Trump needs to step up. I mean, enough of the rhetoric about America is great, enough of, that the economy is the hottest it's ever been. This is about now. This is about right now. And I'm disappointed. I'm beyond disappointed that he has become political. We don't have time for this political maneuvering because of the presidential election. We're talking about real lives, people's lives that are going to be impacted right here in New York. Regardless if you're a blue state, red state, they need to step up. That's part of the legacy, the presidential legacy that he needs to follow that we have seen throughout the years.
Let me ask you a question. The public transportation is starting to come back. There's going to be some budget cuts with transit. There's going to be budget cuts all across the board. Where do you think it's going to hit the hardest? I mean, is it police? Is it transit? Where do you sanitation? I'm not quite sure. We're all going to get hit somewhere. Where do you think we'll feel it the most?
So we just passed the budget around June 30th. That's the latest we have ever done. As a matter of fact, it's due that day. If we didn't get it done by that day, the control board was going to take over, and all of our programs for young people, for seniors, and all of those great programs that we were able to get through and we got through would have been decimated. And so it was never going to be a perfect budget. No budget is at the end of the day. But we had to cut in just about every program that we have in the city, and every agency took a cut. Police department took a cut. Education took a 3% cut. Youth, the Department of Youth, they experienced 25% cut. I mean, it was, and this is why in the council, what we did, we restore program. The ASAP program in college, Bronx Community College was going to get decimated. That's one program we were able to fully restore. So all of your BCC student, we got your back. We worked hard.
All right,
that was on top of my agenda.
Yeah. So by the end of the month, hopefully we'll know more about the budget, and maybe we'll get some, in terms of getting some federal aid. Hopefully you'll check in with us maybe next month or the month after. And in the meantime, hope your family, feels better. You stay strong, and just, we really appreciate everything you do. We really do.
Thank you so much. And thank you for always a pleasure being in your show. It's one of my favorites.
You're our favorites, Fernando. All right. We'll be back with more Today's Verdict. Stay with us right after this. Welcome back. Danna Dennis community organizer from Riders Alliance. The last time, Danna, we saw you, it was in the studio, so obviously things have changed a little bit.
A lot.
First and foremost, how have you been?
I've been good. Obviously, this is a different moment for all of us. I think I've been managing it well. We shut down our office pretty early. And so as someone who's a mom, I've been kind of, balancing that work-home balance, myself and my husband, and it's been different.
I want to get right into the subway. I mean, I'm a big subway fan, ride the subways all the time. I've been doing it for about 25, even maybe almost 30 years. It's the first time I've actually seen the subways less crowded now. I live in Manhattan. But it looks like ridership is starting to go up. People are starting to get back on the subway. Tell me, what happened during the first couple of months in the subway system? Was there really so much of a drop? Tell me what happened once the coronavirus hit.
Yeah, there was a drop. We have about 6 million riders that ride the subway on a daily basis, that ride transit. And we had a decline of as low as 200,000 riders. I mean, it went down significantly. A thing that also happened was the subway has been losing funds, tremendously. There's a big call that we have here at the Riders Alliance for federal aid to help rescue riders. We heard recently even from Pat Foy that, the subway is going to run out of money. MTA is going to run out of money they're looking at the end of August. They might not make it. And so these are kind of the things that have happened. The subway itself doesn't always depend on ridership, but they've taken such a huge hit to keep it going. Go ahead.
Let me ask you a question, because you would think if there were not a lot of riders over the past 3 to 4 months, that maybe we would have been saving money because I guess you don't have to clean the stations as much, clean the trains. But is that true or no?
So that's the thing. The ridership has been down, but the system still runs. Even with the shutdown that we've had from the 1 a.m. to 5 a.m. hour, those 4 hours when the subway is supposed to go through this maximum amount of cleaning, we're calling on the governor to reopen the subway 24 hours, because to fully reopen New York City in these 4 phases that have been presented, there is no way that you cannot reopen the subway 24 hours. We have a lot of riders that depend on it. And one thing that has happened is that those trains continuously run. So the workers, who we're very thankful for, so many of the essential workers through transit have had to expose themselves and continue to ride and run those trains. So they're running even for those 4 hours when nobody is on it. And so that is money, that's, dues, that's union fees. There's a lot of stuff that has to be paid still during that time. Yeah.
Well, I know there's been a new budget passed. It looks like, unfortunately, the subway system is going to be taking a hit. I think from what I see, it's almost 65 million. Tell me your position with respect to the budget cut.
Yeah, so Fair Fares, which is the discounted Metro card program for low-income riders, that doesn't come necessarily from MTA or transit, which is run by the governor in the state level, but it comes from the city and the mayor, who has been funding in his administration the Fair Fares initiative. They just fully opened it January of this year. It was completely open to all riders who are at or below the federal poverty line. And so this was a huge thing, right? We were funded with $106 million. We had never really hit that maximum. A lot of money was finally donated to advertising. We had a span from January to March, I believe, of this year, probably February. We saw Fair Fares in every subway station. It was on every bus, and people finally knew that they could apply for this. And now here we go. We're hit with this big cut of $65 million. And it's really at the wrong time. It's disappointing because what we have is millions of New Yorkers who are out of work. They're going to need to get back on transit. They're going to need to get down to the unemployment office. They're going to need to get to job interviews, medical appointments, and it's really the lifeblood of our city. And so if anything, this is the time when folks are going to need that help to get that Metro card and get our economy going again. So, yeah.
I remember when we discussed this in the studio, I remember you had said that we were trying to get the word out. A lot of people didn't know that they had this benefit that they could use.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden they find out about it and they could use it. And now there's not enough money there to go around. It's really a shame. What can be done at this point? What is your organization arguing for? And realistically, what do you think can happen?
I think the budget has been passed, unfortunately, and so the cut has been made. I think the solution at this point is for us to continue to highlight the benefits of fair fares, getting in contact with those riders who are using it, who are saving money, they're tangibly putting something back into their pockets, whether it's for the rent that they now need to desperately pay or whatever means are happening in their home. And I think the more that we can show the administration, show the mayor, show the speaker that this is a need, fair fares must happen. The money must continue in this budget. Yes, we've been hit with this pandemic. Let this be a one-time cut, but we need to come back stronger in next year's budget. And the more people that can apply, and let me be clear, last year, this time, we're only 6 months into the year. We are at 190,000 plus in applications, when last year, this time, with no advertisement, we were at half of that. So we know there's a need. We know that just in a few months, ridership has gone up. It has, I'm hearing the applications are coming in triple what they were coming in years before. So this is the time. If riders can apply, we can get and maximize what is left in the budget and show the mayor and show the administration it's needed. Hopefully next year we'll have some leverage to that argument.
Can I ask you a question? Is this related at all to the buses also, or is it just subways?
So yeah, that's a great thing. The mayor and the speaker's office made a commitment for extra miles for bus lanes, and it surely is. Buses are needed. We know that more low-income riders are on buses. We actually know that buses have been the way that folks have been getting around. They've had more fears and concerns. We surveyed 1,000 riders last month, and surely we were hearing more concerns about folks getting back on the subway, even with the newfound cleanliness. The reason for that, and that's really what we're calling on the governor to do, is the crowding. Folks are scared. You can clean the subways as much as you want, but if you don't speed up the frequency of the service, especially during off-peak, and you don't open it up 24/7, we're going to have more crowds on the subway, more crowds on the platforms, and that is not going to be safe given the pandemic.
Danna, I want to thank you. I mean, it's a tough topic. Everyone's just getting hit with budget cuts everywhere, and we need that subway and we need that bus. Hopefully the next time we talk, you give us a little bit of an update, whether it's in the studio or if it's home. Okay.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes. I thank you. I appreciate this so much.
All right.
Hopefully
Danna,
folks will spread the word.
It's always a pleasure. You stay safe.
All right. Thank you. You do the same.
We'll be back with more Today's Verdict right after this. We're back with Peter Rahbar, an employment attorney. Many of you have been asking for an attorney just like Mr. Rahbar to discuss some of the recent protections that you're looking for when you get back to work. But first and foremost, Peter, I'd like to thank you for coming on the show.
David, it's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
From an employment standpoint, you're busy. A lot of lawyers are not. The trial guys are not. They can't get in and get a trial. Jurors are not really coming in, obviously. But business has been pretty booming for you. Why is that?
It is a crazy time right now, to be honest. And it's a multi-layered response. I think at the initial start of the pandemic, the calls I was getting were mostly from, the small employers who I represent about what to do with their workforce, what options were available to them, what these new laws that were being passed every day meant for them, how they could apply for PPP loans and other forms of relief, and that's really transitioned over the last few weeks to, calls from my employee clients, which is really the predominant part of my practice is representing individuals, asking questions about returning to work, layoffs, treatment they've suffered throughout the pandemic, their concerns about going back to work. And, in the past couple of weeks, there's been, as you know, And as you've seen in media reports, a tremendous amount of debate going on in workplaces over, how different groups are treated and, how they would like to be treated. And, so there's a lot of concerns that have arisen over that. I mean, employment litigation is booming right now. So, maybe you want to consider transitioning your practice and,
I don't know.
and working with me a little bit.
I have to tell you, we're not getting any trials. Most of my stuff is virtual depositions at this point in conferences. Who knows? It may happen. Let's talk a little bit about the employee who, they may not realize this, some do, but if your employer offers you your position back at this point, and you're afraid to go back, we won't talk about the protections yet, and you don't go back, you lose your unemployment. Am I correct?
Yes, I mean that's definitely a possibility. If you're eligible to return to work and your employer has a job for you, you can't just choose to stay home and collect unemployment. And I think a lot of the reporting, unfortunately, is really inaccurate about that. And I think it's fueled by political motivations. But, what I would encourage instead is a dialogue with your employer, because you do have certain rights and certain reasons why you could not return to work, or you could, work from home instead. But you'll never get to that point if you just have a flat out refusal and don't talk with your employer about it.
Okay, so let's get back to work, shall we? And everybody else is starting to get back to the office. I've opened up my offices, my office, should I say, and we have a little bit of a rotation as to who goes in on certain days, and we put in certain protections. What types of protections do you expect an employer at this point to provide for their returning employees?
Well, there are very specific guidelines under local, state, and federal laws. And so if you're an employer, you have to be certain that you are aware of what they are. And they're readily available either on the CDC website, on the New York State Forward website, or on local New York City websites. And they're business dependent. So different businesses have different requirements. As an employer, if you want your employees to come back, I think it is in your best interest not only to know what they are, but to also clearly communicate to your employees what you are doing and what they can expect and what they can expect to see and experience in the workplace.
Well, let's wear the hat of the employee. The employee says, I don't feel safe, Mr. Rahbar. I don't want to go back to work. I don't see partitions. There's no hand sanitizer. And my friend Betty, she's coughing up a storm. What do you say? What do you do there?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really valid question, and one I've actually, dealt with people on. First of all, you should understand, if you don't know what safeguards are available to you, you should understand what they are. So if your employer is not communicating them, you should ask them, what safeguards have you put in place? If I don't have a mask, will there be one for me? The answer should be yes. Will I be tested upon arrival? That's important to know. What are the rules in the elevators? I'm in my office today as well. There are clearly marked spots in the elevator where people are supposed to stand. There are clearly marked spots in the lobby where people are supposed to stand. So you should know all the rules. If you have any issues with anything you're hearing, I encourage you to be open and speak with your employer about it. I mean, that may not be most employees' natural tendency, but I think during this time, you have to do that. I mean, if there is something that is bothering you, you should let them know and have a discussion about it.
Well, Peter, let me ask you a question. What if the issue isn't that the office is not safe, but your child isn't in camp and you have to take care of your child? Or, September's right around the corner and, Mayor DeBlasio may open the schools and the next thing or may not open the schools for a couple of days and you end up having to stay home again with your child. Can you use that as an excuse? As, I'm not coming back yet and I still want to get paid. Where does that fall into it? Do you have any right at that point or not really?
Absolutely, you do. There are a number of laws that were passed in the spring on the federal and the state level, providing paid leave specifically for instances where, you know, your children don't have childcare or school facilities available to them. So if the schools are still closed, you can have up to 12 weeks of at least partially paid leave, depending on the size of your employer. So, you know, again, if that's the problem, you should talk with your employer about it. You do have rights. I think what a lot of employees don't understand is that if the employer just declares, hey, we're open, that you have to follow along with that. And the answer is no. I mean, you don't. There are rights that you have and protections that you have. School is one of them. Taking care of someone with a health condition or someone who has COVID is another one of them. But we'll never get to that if you don't have the discussion.
What about, and I've gotten this question in an email, actually, specifically from a viewer, forcing you to get a COVID test. You know, we don't want you back in the office until you have a COVID test. Without a COVID test, we're not going to hire you back because your coworkers aren't comfortable, or we know you had COVID. Do you have the antibodies? Are you still contagious? Tricky.
Yeah, it's a tricky question, and it's one that governments are still grappling with, government agencies. So the EEOC, which is the federal agency, has said, because of the pandemic, employers are entitled to ask for COVID tests, but they are not entitled to ask for antibody tests. So, you know, if there's any reason, and also they have to have a reasonable, you know, basis to ask for these. So if there's any reason for them to think that you know, may have had COVID, maybe you've told them, or you have symptoms, and you know, they are allowed to ask you questions about your symptoms, then they may ask that you take a test.
All right, Peter, we don't have too much time. Final tip: someone's watching today. You know, let's employer, employee, but just maybe you can mix it. Some real great tip that you want to give to somebody who's saying, you know what, I'm not comfortable at work, or the employer, I've given you everything that I have. What's a good tip? What would you say?
Sure. So my number one tip for employers is be flexible. You know, hard and fast rules are not going to work. You know, this is a time where you need to understand that people are under a lot of pressure, they're facing a lot of difficulties, and there's a lot of fears. You know, maybe you believe you can guarantee a clean workplace and a safe workplace, but people still have to take subways and buses to get to work, and they have concerns there. If you're an individual, you know, speak up is my number one tip. You know, don't, if you're afraid of something, if you're concerned about something, tell your employer about it, have a conversation, get it out there.
Peter, great stuff. Peter Rahbar, this is the guy you want on your side. Trust me, I know personally. All right. Mr. Rahbar, say hello to everybody. And
thanks.
We'll be back with more Today's Verdict right after this. I'd like to thank our good guests for joining us, and of course you, the viewers, for watching. If you have any questions about today's show or would like to see a future topic discussed, email me at davidlesch@bronxnet.org. From all of us at Today's Verdict, always remember, know your issues, learn the law, reach a verdict with us. We'll see you next time.